Hello, everybody, and welcome to the last episode in the climate writing course that I'm delivering with the Libraries NI, and it's just been a real pleasure to be here and to be doing this. And I'd like to just thank Libraries NI for this opportunity. It's been a really nice time, and I've been getting to know lots of other writers in the process, so that's always a bonus. Let me see, I'm going to start my share now so you don't have to listen to me wittering on. And here we go. So today we're having a look at dystopian versus reality in fiction, but also maybe in just how we talk about climate fiction or climate change. So let's get that. So our learning objectives today, it's to this idea of distinguishing between dystopian climate fiction and current climate realities. We want to analyze effective climate communication strategies, and we want to apply balanced approaches in climate writing. So, for example, current climate data as it stands this week. So I took this from just data on a search. This was what I searched, and we came up with the global temperature rise is 1.1 degrees centigrade since pre-industrial era. It's a wee bit vague, that pre-industrial era. It goes against a little bit of what we had been talking about being specific. So I did look at that up, and this is when we say pre-industrial era, we're talking 1800. So and this overall rise is 1.1. It's really approaching 1.2 quite quickly, and at times it spikes at 1.5. So we have hit 1.5, but only not if you average out over the planet and over the year. So that's part of this thing about having the information, really succinct so that we know what we're talking about. So another example of this was the Arctic sea ice decline. I came up with that it was minus 13% per decade. And I was like, well, what does that really mean? So really where they've come up with this, it's the sea ice that survives the summer melt season. And this is between 1970 and 2000, this particular statistic. Some statistics are coming up at minus 30% in more recent years. I think it was 2019 or whatever. But just to give you this idea of the differing statistics that are going to be thrown at you and how to interpret them. Drill down, find out exactly what they're talking about. But this in itself is quite, what they've done is they've used satellite imaging, and that's why it starts in 1970. It might actually be 1979. It might not even be 1970. When I look at that again, I think that might be a typo. But 1979 is definitely when they started their satellite imaging. And so they were able to kind of measure it from photographs. So, but it's no matter what way you cut it, no matter what way you talk about the decline, it's declining. And then sea level rise is 3.3 millimeters per year. Now that might not sound like a lot, like 3.3 millimeters. It's tiny, but in some parts of the planet that accumulates more than in others. So again, this is a global average, and when you globally average things, the numbers start to come down, and they don't look significant, but this is significant. So what I want you to do is have a little think, and this is a chat prompt, and I want you to share one climate change impact that you've witnessed locally. So what do you think? That idea of the winters were colder when I was young. I remember like walking through snow banks in Ireland, like one winter, I think it was in the 80s, coming up to Christmas, and that was really exciting because we thought we were going to have a white Christmas. So one climate change impact that you've witnessed locally. And if you can throw those into the chat while I'm doing the next slide, that'd be great, and we'll come back to it. So this is Oisin McGann is a writer, an Irish writer. He I follow him on Facebook. Probably I think I follow him on nearly every platform, but he posted this the other week, last week, just after Storm Dara, and I thought this really summed up exactly that prompt that I was talking about. And he said, Storm Dara knocked out our power, and then when that came back, we lost our water supply somehow. It's still not back. As a result, we're washing with bottled water and flushing the toilets with water from the local river. When I was in the local hardware shop buying the drum for the water, a woman was buying the kind of kettle you use on a gas stove. Later in the day, I was talking to a guy who has a well. When his power goes, so does his water. Now, this is in Ireland. This sounds like somewhere, like in sort of like the Appalachian Mountains to me, but this is in Ireland. So he was planning. So this is back in the hardware store, and the man he was talking to was planning to buy a generator. He sells logs, and he'd just been called out to a place where 10 trees in one location had been blown down. It's not obvious up close, but we are slowly being forced to prepare for the emergencies the changing climate is going to keep throwing at us. So that almost sounds dystopian to me, that preparation for something big happening. And this is a Facebook post that I noticed on the 9th of December this year. So I'm just going to run into the chat here to have a look and see what is coming up. Lots of little comments. Great, thank you. There's Ashling has said overtopping waves which lead to more flooding. Absolutely. Rhonda has said flooding. Yeah, definitely flooding has come up. Sinead, kids hardly ever get to build snowmen anymore. That is so sad. And the thing about snow is that it feels like nearly it's such a rarity now. And snow is hard. It's hard for farmers. It's hard for homeless people, obviously, and people who maybe are challenged at keeping their homes warm. But and the elderly can't get out and they're afraid of slipping and all that there. But there's something joyful about snow too. And it would be an awful shame if kids never got to see snow and build snowmen and have snowball fights and slide in the snow and all those things. Then somebody in their garden, yeah, Laura has noticed it in the garden. The roses last longer. I find that, like, I haven't even pruned my raspberries this year, and it's December. Normally, I have that done by October. Um, Rhonda has said fewer insects. And then yet I would say sometimes different kinds of insects. I noticed that there was like insects flying in the air a couple of nights ago at twilight, just at dusk, and I thought that was strange for December. So it's sort of warmer when it shouldn't be, and then what that leads to then is that the in the garden anyway that the pests don't get killed off, and then you have worse issues with it next year. Um, yeah, sorry. And then Philippa had come in and said that we get more insects if we don't have enough winter frost. That's exactly what I was saying there. Winters which are not properly cold, and that'll lead to things like cherry trees not putting out fruit and things. So there's all these different things. Tulips need a certain amount of cold in the winter in order to blossom each year. So nature will notice it. Rhonda is saying heat waves. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we bought a water tank in Ireland. To need a water tank just seems ridiculous. Plants are budding earlier. Yeah, plants are budding now, and then a frost will come and kill all those buds. So it really confuses nature. Some seeds won't germinate if they don't go through a freeze. Midges in December. I think that's what I saw that time. They dance around, they're like little fairies in the air. Um, haven't come across that now, but not the biting kinds. Yeah, we've got a few of those here. So the conversation is going, and you can see that there are changes. And the bottom line is there's strange things afoot. So I'm going back and this is Oisin McGann's book. Again, it's coming up to Christmas. This might be something you could consider buying for that young person in your life. But it's a hopeful guide to climate change, and the links there, and the link will be in the chat as well. And Jenny's going to probably put them in at the end as well. I have them in at the front of the top end of the chat. So, thinking about a reality check. When you're writing, think about the recent extreme weather events worldwide. Are they as bad as the dystopian futures that you read about in climate fiction or any other fiction? Sometimes they are. Sometimes they are. So, if you're writing about climate, try not to make it sound dystopian, but also it has to be, you have to tell it as it is. There's an economic impact as well with climate change, because you've got all that, like just thinking about the roads that were washed away in North Carolina after the hurricane there recently, just a month or so ago, a couple of months ago. All that infrastructure has to be replaced and or mended or fixed or alternatives for it. So that's going to have a huge economic impact. There was also a lot of talk about different crops that were wiped out globally. Not wiped out, but damaged and impacted. So like the banana harvest was impacted by a typhoon in Asia. The coffee at the minute, the coffee prices are skyrocketing because coffee plantations have been damaged because of climate change. So this is all coming into the economic impact. It's putting up the price of everything. Our food shortages, all that. So adaptation efforts, what are people doing to adapt? So I have a friend who lives in an area that was flooded several years ago by Hurricane Sandy, and she got her entire house put up up on stilts, like up higher, so that if that happens again, her house is up and out of the flood water. So that's an adaptation effort that will work for a certain length of time now. And hopefully, as we change our ways and we get on top of climate change, maybe that will reverse. And then look at the success stories. What renewable energy growth has there been? What are we doing right? So all of that, try to bring that into your writing. So I decided that this week I would use examples from my own writing, and then if you want to ask questions about it in the chat, then you get to kind of get the sort of the insider view from the writer's perspective. So this is a dystopian example from my Rejuvenation trilogy. It's a near future story primarily about reverse aging, but there are increased sea levels. We have extensive wastelands in other parts of the world. Huge loss of life, and society under pressure. But I have tried to bring into the trilogy hope from renewable energy. So all the vehicles are solar powered, even the buildings have solar glass so that they are all energy efficient and carbon neutral. So there's all the different tech advances and problem solving that makes their lives better. But basically, I have tried to write into it a fundamental faith in humanity, that we will eventually get it right, that we will try to get it right for all the right reasons. And so it's basically a story about good overcoming evil. This is a sample from it. And I just thought you'd like that because it's a local reference. And we're talking about Belfast City Hall. And the main character is looking out from a building that is underwater, but has been built to be underwater so that they can make use of the land that they have lost due to rising sea levels. So she's looking out the underwater window. She could make out the remnants of Belfast City Hall nearby. Decades of submersion had draped the City Hall in a rainbow of colour as corals and algae made the once pristine Portland stone brickwork their home, while the green copper tops of the four corner towers were visible among the blue shadows of water. It's a different view of our Belfast City Hall. And this book was published with an American audience in mind, so that's why the spelling of colour is American. So that was a publisher's decision, not mine. But anyway, so the somebody's written in the chat, so there's hope for coral reefs. Yes, there's hope for coral reefs, hopefully. So how do dystopian narratives help? That's just an example, but how do dystopian narratives help or hinder climate action? So they help it by creating an emotional urgency through vivid future scenarios. They highlight systemic risks that require immediate attention. They motivate preventative action by showing potential consequences, but they hinder it by triggering eco-anxiety, which can lead to paralysis. So it's like, oh my goodness, this is happening. There's nothing I can do about it. So why bother? It sometimes seems so extreme that the reality appears less urgent. So in this particular example, would the oceans rise to completely cover the city hall in Belfast? Unlikely. But some models predicted that they might. But if all the ice caps were gone, would that be the case? It seems very extreme. And so people are kind of like, well, that's just made up, so it doesn't help. Um, and then they can lack actionable solutions. And again, it's that feeling of helplessness, that paralysis. So we have to find balance. So we find balance by combining cautionary elements with achievable solutions and ground fictional scenarios in current science. So some of my fictional scenarios, had were fictional, but then they had like current science was solar panels to create energy, albeit that they were on flying cars. But there are that in itself was extrapolated out from the drone technology that we have, and there are flying cars technically, but they're not obviously in common usage. So that's again how I've woven in the two. Um, include examples, sorry, of successful climate action alongside the rest. I'm just scanning down. Yeah, the description of the city hall completely covered. I totally agree, Philippa. Covered in warm water, enough for corals was too extreme to be the type of fiction that might inspire action. Yeah, definitely, and I completely agree with that 100%. So coming back to our three pillars of effective climate writing, I just wanted to remind you about that. And so, yes, so rejuvenation, I suppose when I was writing it, I was in a place where I maybe was a little bit paralyzed by the thoughts of actually climate reversing or anything like that. So that was where that came from. However, the reality example I would use is my book that's coming out in 2025, and it's called Barren. And it's a dual timeline story about two women navigating infertility against a backdrop of climate change. So the infertility and the climate change are not directly connected, but what it does is there's nearly a parallel there of nature on a micro scale and nature on a macro scale, and how as humans it can be very hard and almost impossible to control either of those. And the historical timeline is inspired by an actual climate downturn for 9 years, as evidenced by the impaired growth of oak trees in 2354 BC. And we have that date from the oak tree ring chronology that is in Queen's University that I worked on as a postgrad. And so it exists, and that this particular time span is actually a thing that has happened in the past. So the modern timeline is also set against the current climate crisis. So a white flake drifts from the sky and lands on Callisto's black hair, followed by another and another until the sky is filled with falling specks. It is the wrong time of year for snow, and the air smells wrong, sour, pungent. So this is a description of volcanic dust falling from Hekla volcano, Hekla 4 actually, eruption in 2354 BC. We have scientific evidence that this eruption happened in that particular year from the tree ring analysis, from ash that has been found in cores of ice in Greenland, and also we have found ash in the bogs, preserved in the bogs of Ireland. So we know that ash fell from the sky on Ireland. So that was why I thought, well, this is maybe what it looked like. And then that was in the past timeline. This is a sample from the modern timeline. So there's a big rainstorm happening outside, and there's a burst pipe outside, which is causing a lot of water falling outside her bedroom window. So she goes back to bed, but the slapping water keeps her awake and staring into a monochrome room. Uncle Jack's assurances don't quell her rising panic. She knows in theory they'll be fine. They're in an elevated position, far enough from the Callan River to be unaffected if it bursts its banks, which happens from time to time. Her mind flits to the news images she's seen of people in flooded Pakistan, crammed onto high ground not much wider than a single-lane road, their few remaining possessions with them in small bedraggled piles. She thinks of the footage of families on rooftops in Missouri awaiting rescue, the inundated villages in Mozambique, the landslides caused by rain-soaked land in Portugal, communities in Australia evacuated because of rising waters. She pulls her thoughts closer to home, to the streets of Strabane, people in despair at homes underwater yet again, while their kids kayak on their flooded football pitches. So that was inspired by actually seeing footage of all of those things. There's a website as well that I use called I have the link for it in the chat, floodnews.com, I think it is, and it tells you where is flooding on a global basis. So usually there's something somewhere every day. And I just with this example, it was just to show that, there's the local impact, but then there's the far-reaching or the other places on the planet. I think I've kind of tried to pull in every continent there. So it's really about balancing urgency with hope. So provide specific achievable steps. I haven't had enough examples to show you that in Barron, but towards the end of Barron, I'm hoping that it's more hopeful and uplifting. And then scale the actions from the individual. This is in general in your climate writing. Scale the actions from individual to systemic levels. Include resource links and contact information. So for example, at the back of Barron, I'm actually going to have a bibliography, which is kind of unusual for a fiction book, but hopefully it'll help people to fact check some of the things I've written about, especially in the Neolithic timeline, and come to, sort of like learn a bit more about climate change. Highlight collective impact potential. So looking at what we can do together. And I have one more example to show you with that. And leave your reader audience on a high point. So this is the last little bit of my own writing that I'll share. And it's a little bit very, very near the end. So sorry about spoilers, but it's very, very near the end of Toxic Relationships, the play, the climate change play. And we have a consumer, moon and earth having a discussion. So consumer says, I know we face environmental destruction, but there are people planting trees to regrow forests, cleaning up rivers and beaches, walking and biking to avoid emissions, educating youth to be stewards of the planet, advocating tirelessly for climate policies and leaders who will make real change. Despite the climate crisis, there is incredible care for our shared world blossoming in people's hearts. At our best, humans reflect an innate love of nature and desire to protect life. That is why we are worth saving. The moon says, so even if I've given up on you, it seems like you haven't given up on yourself. And the earth chimes in with, I think that's what actually matters, not giving up. So I would also like to point out that the actors who perform this deliver it far better than I do just reading here. What's your biggest challenge when writing about climate issues? And if you want to, you can jot that into the chat. We might have time to go through it at the very end. What's one technique you'll implement in your climate writing that you've learned about in the course? If you can think about something that you making it realistic. Thank you. Yeah. What's your key takeaway from this course? This is just a little summary of my writing and some links down here if you'd like to follow me on social media. And these are the books, and this is the Toxic Relationships poster. And just go to a writing exercise if you choose to do it. I'm just going to let you take this away as an idea. Transform a dystopian scenario. So, for example, coastal cities will drown, balanced with cities adapting to rising seas through innovation. And that's just the resources mentioned there. So just going into the chat. Let's see. Yeah, so so fact checking, trying to avoid too much depressive thoughts. Yeah, that's the hard one. And also as writers, we're really inclined to kind of drill into the drama and the conflict, and that's the depressing side of it. Challenges time and ability. So time, I'm not sure if that means like time for writing, but I'm going to interpret that as that we're running out of time in the climate crisis scenario, because it is, time is short now and we need to act now. And what can we act and what can we do? Sinead, leaving readers on a high, give them hope. Yeah. And then techniques, making it relatable, including hope. Definitely making it relatable and also making the hope relatable. Rhonda's definitely it. Positive takeaway, good to do something new for me and saying I can write something. That's great, Rhonda. Thank you for sharing that. We have 3 more minutes. If anybody wanted to ask questions or drop anything else into the chat,